The courtroom was alive with the tension of a high-stakes trial. The air carried a mixture of nervous whispers, the shuffle of papers, and the echo of shoes against polished wooden floors. Bright fluorescent lights shone down from above, reflecting. Off the dark mahogany tables where attorneys sat poised, every movement precise, every glance calculated. On the far side, jurors shifted uneasily in their seats, absorbing the gravity of the case before them. The atmosphere was thick, a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and the sense that whatever verdict was reached here would change lives forever. Seated at the prosecutor's table was a man with furrowed brows, his eyes darting between the jury and the pile of evidence stacked neatly before him. Across from him, the defense attorney leaned back in his chair, feigning calm, though his tapping pen betrayed his nerves. Between them, presiding at the elevated bench, the judge maintained a stern composure, his gavel resting within reach, ready to strike at the faintest hint of disorder. But perhaps the most unusual presence in the courtroom wasn't human head. By the witness stand sat a large German shepherd, his coat gleaming under the lights, his posture dignified and still. His handler, a uniformed officer, sat beside him, maintaining a firm but relaxed grip on the leash. The dog's name was Rex, and though he was technically there as part of the police team, his calm aura drew glances from jurors and spectators. Alike, Rex wasn't new to the courtroom. He had been trained as a K-9 officer, a dog who had tracked down missing children, apprehended suspects, and sniffed out hidden dangers no human eye could detect. He carried himself like he understood his purpose. He didn't fidget, didn't bark, didn't even react to the nervous chatter around him. Instead, he simply sat, alert yet composed, his amber eyes scanning the room as though he could see through every lie, every secret, every carefully constructed defense. The spectators couldn't help but feel something unusual when they looked. At him, there was reassurance in his presence, an unspoken reminder that while men might twist words, truth had a way of revealing itself. Still, no one could have predicted that truth would come from the smallest, most unexpected voice in the room. At the back of the courtroom, nearly hidden from view, sat a woman clutching a tiny child on her lap. The little girl couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Her hair was pulled into uneven pigtails, and she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit tightly in her arms. Her guardian whispered gently, trying to keep her entertained, hoping the hours would pass without incident. After all, courtrooms were no place for children. The judge had only allowed her inside because there had been no one else to care for her that day. The child swung her legs idly, her shoes not quite touching the ground. For a while, she seemed distracted by the ceiling lights, then by the polished wood of the benches. But gradually, her gaze shifted. Her wide eyes, the kind only a toddler possessed, unfiltered, unblinking, fixed on something no one else seemed to notice. It was Rex. While the adults busied themselves with testimony, objections, and cross-examinations, the girls' focus never wavered. She didn't smile, didn't giggle. She simply stared at the dog with a curiosity so deep it bordered on recognition. Rex, too, noticed. Though he had been trained to stay calm, his ears twitched slightly, his head tilting in the faintest motion toward her. His handler didn't notice at first. To most, it looked like nothing. But to anyone watching closely, there was something different in the way Rex's attention lingered on the child. As though he knew her. As though some invisible thread had connected them across the crowded courtroom. The girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if she should. Her guardian hushed her softly, mistaking her silence for restlessness. But silence wasn't restlessness. It was focus. It was the stillness of a child who understood far more than adults gave her credit for. From the judge's perspective, the little girl was a minor detail, an unfortunate circumstance. Children didn't belong in trials of this magnitude. But he dismissed the thought, turning back to the attorneys arguing before him. His attention was consumed by evidence, procedure, and the weight of law. He couldn't know that the trial's most shocking moment would come not from his gavel, not from the attorney's arguments, but from the smallest person in the room. The defense attorney rose, pacing before the jury, his voice smooth, rehearsed, dripping with confidence. He painted his client as misunderstood, as wrongfully accused. Jurors shifted, some skeptical, others unsure. The prosecutor scribbled notes furiously, preparing his rebuttal. And in the back, the child blinked, still staring at Rex, the German. Shepard's handler finally noticed the subtle shift in his partner. Rex wasn't restless, but his gaze had locked onto the child with unusual intensity. The handler frowned slightly, but remained silent. He had learned long ago to trust Rex's instincts. The dog saw what others missed. The girl, meanwhile, slowly slipped from her guardian's lap. She stood unsteadily, her small hand gripping the edge of the wooden bench for balance. Her guardian reached to pull her back down, whispering her name firmly, but the child resisted. Her eyes never left Rex. It wasn't mischief. It wasn't childish distraction. It was recognition. At that exact moment, the courtroom's rhythm shifted. A witness on the stand faltered mid-sentence, distracted by the sudden silence of the crowd. Papers stopped shuffling. Even the tapping of the defense attorney's pen ceased. People began to notice the girl, standing now, barely tall enough for her head to peek over the bench. The judge looked up, irritation crossing his face at the interruption. He opened his mouth to order silence, but the words never left his lips. The little girl raised her hand. Her small finger pointed directly at Rex, the German shepherd who sat poised by the witness stand. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move, but his eyes deepened, focused, as though he understood the weight of her gesture. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The girl's guardian turned pale, whispering for her to sit down. But the child remained standing, fingers still extended, eyes wide with certainty. It wasn't playful. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. And in that stillness, a strange realization swept the room. The little girl was about to speak. What words could a 3-year-old possibly have that mattered in a court of law? What could she know that adults, investigators, and attorneys had spent months trying to uncover? The answer was impossible to predict. Yet everyone leaned in, jurors craning their necks, spectators clutching the benches, even the judge himself, lowering his glasses slightly. Every soul in the courtroom understood one thing. Whatever the child was about to say, it would matter. It would ripple through the trial in a way no one had expected. And as Rex's ears flicked forward, his body suddenly tense, the little girl's lips parted. The room froze, breathless, waiting. The silence in the courtroom felt unnatural, like a vacuum that had swallowed every sound. Even the buzzing lights above seemed quieter, as though the building itself was waiting. All eyes were locked on the little girl, her finger still pointed at the German shepherd. She didn't blink. She didn't fidget. She simply stood there, a small figure in a world far too big, her innocent gesture carrying a weight no one could yet understand. Her guardian tugged gently at her arm, whispering, in panic, "Sit down, sweetie, please." But the child didn't move. She wasn't being defiant. She wasn't misbehaving. She was locked in a moment, only she seemed to comprehend. The judge cleared his throat, tapping the gavel lightly, his voice breaking the tension. Order in the court. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the girl. "Ma'am, please keep the child quiet. This is a serious proceeding." The guardian nodded rapidly, pulling the little girl back toward the bench. But instead of settling down, The child turned her face toward Rex again, her eyes shimmering with something deeper than curiosity. It wasn't mischief. It wasn't boredom. It was recognition. The prosecutor frowned, glancing at the canine and then back at the girl. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "perhaps we should allow a short recess." He was no stranger to emotional outbursts in courtrooms. Tears, anger, even shouts. But this was different. This was a toddler breaking protocol, and yet the moment carried a strange gravity no one could explain. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This child has no role here. She's a distraction. We cannot allow a trial of this magnitude to be swayed by a..." He stopped mid-sentence, because Rex had moved. The German shepherd sat up straighter, his eyes locked onto the little girl. His handler stiffened, tightening the leash instinctively, but Rex didn't bark or lunge. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. Anyone who had spent years around dogs could see it. Recognition. Not curiosity, not random attention. Rex knew this child. A murmur ran through the spectators' benches. Whispers floated through the air, carried on a wave of curiosity and disbelief. Does the dog know her? Why is she pointing like that? She looks so certain. The judge rapped his gavel again, irritation cracking through his composure. Silence. This is a courtroom, not a theater. But even as he scolded, his own eyes betrayed curiosity. He studied the girl. Her small frame, her steady gaze, her refusal to be silenced. Then his eyes shifted to Rex, sitting at attention, tail stiff, ears alert. The judge had seen many things in his career. Outbursts, dramatic evidence reveals, even confessions under pressure. But never this. Never a moment where a child and the police. Canine seemed to speak in silent language. No one else could interpret. The guardian tried again, her voice desperate. "Honey, please. Just sit, don't point, please." She pulled the child gently into her lap, but the girl's finger lingered in the air, trembling only slightly. And then, without warning, she spoke. Her voice was small, but it carried. Clear, steady, unafraid. "He knows." Gasps rippled across the room. The guardian clapped her hand over the girl's mouth, horrified. She whispered, rocking her gently as if to undo the words. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard it. The prosecutor froze, pen suspended in midair. The defense attorney scoffed loudly, though his voice cracked when he spoke. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The words of a toddler mean nothing. This is theatrics, nothing more." But no one laughed. No one dismissed it. Because Rex had reacted. The German shepherd's ears perked up sharply at the words. His head turned slowly, his gaze locking not on the child this time, but on the defendant. The room grew colder. The accused, a man in his 30s dressed in a stiff suit, shifted uneasily. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted nervously toward the K9. For the first time that day, his confidence wavered. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to sit upright, but it was too late. Everyone had seen it. He knows. The words hung in the air, echoing like a ghost. The judge's gavel struck hard. Enough. This court will not be disrupted by a child. His voice was stern, but inside, his thoughts raced. He had seen witnesses lie, attorneys manipulate, jurors struggle under pressure. But he had also seen truth appear in the most unexpected places. And though the law required procedure, there was no denying the energy in the room. The little girl squirmed. Free from her guardian's grasp, her small voice rising again, louder this time. "He knows." Her declaration rang out like a bell, pure and unshaken. Every juror leaned forward unconsciously. Spectators clutched at their coats, whispers flooding back, despite the gavel's warning. The prosecutor stared, frozen, while the defense attorney slammed his papers down, his composure cracking. And Rex didn't look away. His handler's knuckles whitened around the leash, but the dog remained still, his body taut, his gaze piercing through the air as though he could see into the defendant's very soul. The bond was undeniable, no. The child's words weren't random. They were tied to something deeper, something no one could yet explain. The guardian was near tears, whispering apologies. "I'm so sorry, Your Honor. She doesn't understand. She's just a child." But as the girl clung to her stuffed rabbit, her eyes still locked on Rex, one thing became clear. She understood more than anyone realized. The judge finally exhaled, his voice softer now, though still authoritative. "We will recess. 10 minutes." He struck the gavel. "Bailiff, clear the courtroom." The spell was broken, but the echoes remained. People shuffled to their feet, stunned, whispering to one another as they filed out. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, some pale, some thoughtful. Even the attorneys looked shaken, though they tried to mask it behind their professional facades. In the sudden shuffle, the girl rested her head on her guardian's shoulder. Tired now, her voice quiet but certain as she whispered once more, "He knows." Her guardian hugged her tightly, fighting tears. And Rex, sitting tall beside his handler, didn't look away from the defendant, not once. When the courtroom reconvened after recess, the air was heavier than before. The break had given everyone a chance to whisper theories, trade nervous glances, and wrestle with what they just witnessed. A 3-year-old's words shouldn't have meant anything, and yet they had. The jurors filed back into their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others staring openly at the defendant. The defense attorney returned with renewed defiance, his jaw tight, his papers shuffled aggressively as though order could erase the chaos of a child's declaration. The prosecutor, meanwhile, remained still, his pen tapping absently as his thoughts churned. At the front, Rex resumed his place by the witness stand. To the untrained eye, the German shepherd appeared calm, his muscular frame poised, his leash held loosely by his handler. But those who knew him, his handler especially, could see the difference. His ears twitched more often. His chest rose and fell with a deeper rhythm. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, weren't wandering the room as usual. They were fixed on the defendant. The handler frowned, his instincts prickling. Rex wasn't an ordinary dog. He was one of the department's best. He didn't break focus without reason. He didn't watch someone this intently unless there was something to watch. The judge entered, robes swaying as he took his seat. "This court is back in session," he announced firmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. A gavel struck once. "We will proceed." The defense attorney stood, ready to regain control of the narrative. He called his next witness, a neighbor meant to provide an alibi for the accused. But as the man took the stand and swore the oath, few eyes were on him. Most were still drawn to Rex, whose silent watch spoke louder than testimony. The child, seated once more in her guardian's lap, peeked around the benches to look at him. Her small face softened with recognition, as though she found comfort in his steadiness. She no longer pointed, no longer spoke, but her gaze told the same story. She trusted him. As the witness answered questions, Rex's body language shifted. His ears flicked forward, then back. His nose twitched faintly, picking up scents unseen and unnoticed by the humans around him. The handler glanced down, tightening his grip subtly. He knew the signs. Rex wasn't restless. He was reading, evaluating, judging in his own silent way. The defense attorney paced in front of the jury, his words confident, rehearsed, persuasive. He painted his client, as a man unfairly targeted, a victim of circumstance. "You see," he declared, gesturing dramatically toward the accused, "my client has been honest from the start. He has nothing to hide." It was then that Rex let out the faintest sound. Not a bark, not a growl. Just a low, rumbling exhale, almost like a sigh. The handler stiffened, shooting a glance at the dog. He whispered a quiet command, and Rex obeyed, but the tension in his body remained. The jurors heard it. They looked at one another, some exchanging nervous smiles, others shifting uncomfortably. They couldn't ignore the timing. The K9 had reacted exactly when the defense attorney had insisted on his client's honesty. The prosecutor noticed too. He scribbled something in his notes, his lips pressing into a thin line. He wasn't sure yet what it meant, but he knew. Better than to dismiss instinct, especially the instinct of a dog trained to detect what humans missed. Meanwhile, the little girl whispered softly to her guardian, her words muffled but audible to those closest to her. "He doesn't like him." Her guardian hushed her quickly, glancing around nervously. But once again, the innocent observation struck deeper than any adult's analysis. The judge rapped his gavel lightly. Silence. His tone was firm, though his own gaze flickered toward Rex. The courtroom had become less about the testimony, and more about the silent witness, who didn't need words. As the cross-examination began, Rex's handler leaned closer to him, whispering, "Easy, boy, easy." He had worked with the dog for years, trusted him more than most people, and in that moment, he felt the truth tugging at him. Rex knew something. He always did. The defendant shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie, clearing his throat. He tried to appear unfazed, but his movements betrayed unease. Rex's eyes followed him like shadows, never blinking, never breaking. The dog's stillness was louder. Then a bark. The defense attorney, growing frustrated, raised his voice. "This dog is irrelevant. He is here as an accessory, not as a witness. Let's not pretend an animal can understand what's happening here." He turned toward the jury, his smile forced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we must focus on facts, not distractions." But the damage was done, because everyone had seen it. Every time the defendant moved, Rex reacted. Not with aggression, but with unshakable attention. His body was a living compass pointing to guilt. The prosecutor rose slowly for his turn, his voice measured. "With respect, Your Honor, this K9 has been trained for years to detect truth through scent, through instinct. He has served in countless cases, never faltering. His presence here is not coincidence." The judge shifted, considering. The law didn't allow for dogs to testify, of course. But no one could deny what they were witnessing. The jurors weren't fools. They saw what was happening. The little girl hugged her stuffed rabbit tightly, her eyes flicking between Rex and the defendant. She didn't smile, didn't giggle. She simply whispered again, almost to herself this time. "He knows." Her guardian rubbed her back, fighting. Tears. There was no silencing innocence. The defense attorney objected loudly, his voice cracking under the strain. "This is absurd. You cannot allow the atmosphere of this courtroom to be tainted by the reactions of a dog and the words of a toddler." But the jury wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Rex, and Rex was looking at the truth. The handler whispered once more, steady but uneasy. "What is it, boy?" His heart thudded, because deep down, he already knew the answer. The German shepherd's silent watch said everything words could not. The trial was no longer about evidence alone. It was about instinct, about innocence, about the unshakable bond between a child who trusted too purely and a dog who had never been wrong. And as the gavel struck again to restore order, the feeling lingered. The truth was already in the room. The day's trial had stretched on, each testimony layered with technical jargon, objections, and carefully worded arguments. The jurors shifted in their chairs, weary but attentive. Lawyers paced, papers shuffled, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. Every heart in the courtroom beat to the rhythm of something else, the silent dialogue between a 3-year-old child and a police K-9. The little girl hadn't spoken again since her earlier words. She sat on her guardian's lap, her small fingers twisting the ear of her stuffed rabbit. But her eyes never wavered. She kept watching Rex, the German shepherd stationed beside the witness stand, as if he was the only one who mattered in the room. Rex returned her gaze. To the untrained eye, the dog was calm, obedient, and professional. But to those who had been watching closely, the truth was undeniable. He wasn't just resting beside his handler anymore. His posture had shifted. His gaze sharpened. He was waiting. For her, for him, for something. The defense attorney was in the middle of questioning a witness, his voice raised just slightly to command authority. "So, you're saying you never saw my client at the scene that night?" He emphasized each word, his tone meant to reassure the jury of his client's innocence. The witness hesitated, eyes darting nervously. I didn't see him clearly." The defense attorney pounced on the hesitation, his voice firm. "Exactly, you didn't see him. Which means you cannot confirm he was there. Thank you." He turned with a flourish, convinced he'd delivered a critical blow to the prosecution's case. But his victory was short-lived. Because as he sat, back down, Rex shifted. The German shepherd leaned forward slightly, ears pricked, eyes narrowing. He released a slow exhale, low and deliberate, the sound just loud enough to be noticed by those sitting closest. The handler tightened the leash, whispering, "Steady, boy." But it was too late. The courtroom had heard it. The jurors stiffened. A ripple of unease passed through the spectators. Even the judge's gaze flickered toward Rex, eyebrows furrowed. And then it happened. The little girl slid off her guardian's lap. Her small shoes thudded softly against the wooden floor as she stood, her stuffed rabbit dangling by its ear. Her guardian reached to pull her back, panic flashing in her eyes. "Sweetie, sit down. Please." But the child resisted. She took one shaky step forward, then another, until she was standing in the narrow aisle between the benches. The courtroom froze. The defense attorney groaned, throwing his hands in the air. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We cannot allow." "Quiet," the judge interrupted sharply, though his own voice trembled slightly. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the girl. "What is she doing?" No one answered. Because at that moment, the little girl raised her arm and pointed again. Her tiny finger extended straight toward Rex, the K-9 who hadn't broken his. Watch all day. The silence was suffocating. Even the air seemed to still, heavy and waiting. Her guardian whispered frantically, "Sit down, please. I beg you." But the child didn't flinch. She stood tall, or at least as tall as her 3-year-old frame could manage, her face set with a seriousness that seemed far too old for her years. Her finger didn't waver. Rex's handler swallowed hard. He'd seen his partner do incredible things. Track scents through miles of wilderness, detect danger long before humans sensed it, comfort victims who couldn't speak. But this was different. The dog was transfixed, his gaze locked onto the girl as though her gesture was a command only he understood. The judge, caught between authority and curiosity, spoke carefully. "Young lady, what are you pointing at?" His voice softened, gentler than anyone had ever heard it in that courtroom. The child didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Rex, her arm trembling slightly with the effort of holding it steady. Her guardian buried her face in her hands. "She's just a child. She doesn't understand." But everyone else understood. The atmosphere shifted, deepened. The weight of expectation pressed against every chest. It was as though the entire courtroom leaned forward as one, waiting for her to speak. The prosecutor set down his pen, forgetting his notes entirely. The jurors held their breath. Even the defense attorney, who had spent the morning oozing confidence, found himself frozen, his protests dying in his throat. The little girl's lips parted. At first, no sound came, just a whisper of breath. Her guardian shook her head, desperately whispering, "Please, not now, please." But the girl stood firm, and then she spoke. Two small words, soft, innocent, certain. "He knows." Gasps erupted across the room. A woman in the back clutched her chest. One of... The jurors' eyes widened in shock. The defense attorney slammed his papers down in protest, but the words had already landed. They hung in the air like thunder, reverberating through every corner of the courtroom. The judge's gavel struck. "Order! Order in the court!" But his voice trembled, betraying the weight of the moment. "He knows." The little girl repeated it, louder this time, her voice carrying. Her eyes never left Rex, and Rex's eyes never left the defendant. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become something else, a place where innocence spoke and instinct answered. The defendant shifted in his chair, his face pale. He adjusted his tie nervously, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to remain composed, but every twitch, every nervous swallow was amplified under Rex's unrelenting stare. The jurors weren't looking at the attorneys anymore. They weren't even looking at the witness on the stand. They were looking at the girl. And at Rex, the child lowered her arm finally, clutching her rabbit once more. She looked tired, but her expression never wavered. She had spoken, and in her mind, that was enough. Her guardian hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "Oh, honey, why did you have to?" She trailed off, her voice breaking. But the truth was undeniable. No one in that courtroom could shake what they had just witnessed. Not the attorneys, not the jurors, not even the judge. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the silence of waiting for testimony, or the silence of deliberation. It was the silence of revelation. A silence that said, something had just changed. The courtroom remained frozen in disbelief. Even after the child's words hung in the air, a strange tension refused to dissipate. "He knows." Two simple words, uttered by a 3-year-old, yet their weight was undeniable. The jurors exchanged uncertain glances, some mouths opening slightly, then closing again, as if they'd lost their ability to speak. Witnesses looked around nervously, unsure of where to direct their attention. Even the seasoned lawyers felt the strange gravity in the room, and for a brief moment, all professional composure faltered. The defense attorney slammed his hands onto the table. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This has nothing to do with the case." He jabbed a finger toward the child, though he didn't dare look directly at Rex. The dog's gaze, steady and unflinching, was now fixed on the defendant, who squirmed in his chair. His face was pale, his lips tight, his hands clenched into fists. The judge rapped his gavel, attempting to regain control. "Order! I will not have this court disrupted by a child or an animal. We proceed with testimony." His voice rang out. But even as he spoke, he glanced at Rex. The German shepherd remained motionless, like a living statue, his eyes holding an intensity no human witness could convey. The prosecutor adjusted his notes, though he scarcely glanced at them. He could feel the shift in the courtroom. Something had changed. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "with respect, the canine's behavior and the child's reaction cannot be ignored. They may not testify in the legal sense, but there's clearly an instinctive recognition happening here that warrants attention." The judge blinked, frowning. He was bound by law, procedure, and reason. A dog's instinct was not evidence. A child's words were not testimony. Yet, he could not shake the unease pressing against his chest. Something was happening, something that transcended legal boundaries. From the back of the courtroom, the little girl whispered again, almost under her breath, "He knows." Her guardian froze, fear etched into her features. "Sweetie, she?" "Not again," she whispered. She hugged her child close, trying to shield her from attention, though the effect was futile. The words, once uttered, could not be taken back. Rex's ears twitched, his tail stiffened slightly. The dog's muscles tensed under the handler's hand, subtle but unmistakable. Anyone who had worked with K9 officers would have recognized the signs: alertness, focus, the quiet signal that something significant was unfolding. The defendant's demeanor began to unravel. He adjusted his tie nervously, his fingers fidgeting, tapping against the arm of his chair. His eyes flicked toward Rex, and then toward the little girl, and he swallowed audibly. Beads of sweat formed at his hairline. He tried to sit straighter, tried to project confidence, but his body betrayed him. Every subtle movement revealed unease. The jurors noticed it. Their eyes flicked between the accused, the child, and the dog. Something intangible was happening, a force that had nothing to do with law or logic. Their expressions shifted, some pale, others wary, as though instinct itself whispered to them that the truth was being revealed in a way no one expected. The gallery murmured softly. A woman whispered, "Did she just say he knows?" Another voice replied, "That dog. He's watching him. Look." People leaned forward, trying to make sense of the unspoken narrative unfolding before them. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "This court is descending into farce. You cannot allow a child's imagination or a dog's instincts to influence proceedings." His voice trembled slightly. He glanced at the judge, then at the jurors, who were clearly distracted. He slammed his papers down again, but no one seemed to notice. The prosecutor remained calm but resolute. "Your Honor, we cannot ignore behavior like this. The child has observed something, and the dog, a trained canine, is reacting. While this is not formal testimony, these reactions carry weight. They point to truth." The judge pinched the bridge of his nose. He had seen hundreds of cases, many fraught with lies, deceit, and manipulation. But rarely had he witnessed a situation like this. A toddler's words, coupled with a canine's reaction, conveying information that seemed undeniable to the human eye and ear. He sighed heavily. "We will continue, but I caution all parties. The court must remain focused on admissible evidence. No distractions," the little girl whispered again. This time it wasn't under her breath. Her tiny voice rang softly but clearly. "He knows." Even the court reporter paused, pen hovering over paper. The words seemed to reverberate through the room, echoing against the high ceilings and polished wooden panels. Rex's body shifted once more. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing on the accused. His subtle movements were deliberate. The handler's grip on the leash tightened, though he spoke no words. He didn't have to. Rex's behavior said everything. The jurors couldn't unsee it. The defendant's confidence, which had seemed so unshakable at the trial's start, was eroding under the weight of something they couldn't explain. Each twitch, each glance at the dog, each swallowed word told a story that the attorneys could not argue against. The defendant's lips moved slightly, perhaps to protest, but no sound came out. His mind raced. He tried to remind himself that this was just a child, just a dog, nothing more. But deep down, he knew the world had shifted beneath him. "Your Honor," the defense attorney stammered, "I request a recess. Clearly, the situation is spiraling out of control." The jury is being influenced by factors that have no bearing on evidence or law. The judge paused. His gavel rested on the block. He looked at Rex and the child. Then he looked at the defendant. Then he exhaled slowly. "Very well," he said finally. 10-minute recess. The courtroom erupted in whispered speculation as spectators shuffled, attention palpable. Every step the little girl took, every blink of Rex's amber eyes, seemed to leave an imprint on those who witnessed it. Even seasoned officers shook their heads, stunned at the silent dialogue occurring before them. The guardian crouched down, hugging her child tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I didn't expect. I didn't know what you'd say." The little girl rested her head against her stuffed rabbit. "Calm now." "He knows," she whispered again, almost like a mantra. Rex remained alert, watching, waiting, his posture unwavering. The defendant could no longer meet the dog's gaze without flinching. Each subtle movement betrayed him, each bead of sweat and swallowed word, amplifying the story the courtroom was now witnessing without evidence, without testimony, without legal precedent. By the time the recess ended, a strange understanding had settled over the courtroom. Whether anyone admitted it openly or not, they all felt the unshakable truth. Sometimes, truth could be revealed in ways words could not express. Through innocence, instinct, and the unwavering bond between a child and a dog. And in that moment, no one doubted the gravity of two small, simple words. "He knows." The courtroom had grown quiet again, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Each person present felt it. A truth unspoken, creeping between the polished wood and high ceilings, impossible to ignore. The trial had become more than a case of law. It was now a study in instinct, innocence, and revelation. The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her small fingers kneading the worn fabric as if it were her lifeline. Her wide eyes, unblinking and earnest, remained fixed on Rex, the German shepherd stationed beside the witness stand. The dog's amber eyes met hers, unwavering, intelligent, and alive with understanding. It was a silent bond, older than words, older than logic. A bond forged not by training manuals or courtroom protocols, but by something instinctive, profound. The girl and Rex understood one another in a way no adult could. The judge glanced down at them, curiosity flickering across his face, despite his effort to maintain composure. He had seen many moments in courtrooms, outbursts, confessions, dramatic displays, but nothing like this. A child and a dog had seized the attention of everyone in the room without speaking beyond two simple words. "He knows," she whispered again, barely audible, her voice carrying the same certainty as before. The prosecutor leaned forward, sensing the shift. He had studied canine behavior before, seen trained dogs respond to scent and instinct in ways humans couldn't comprehend. But this was different. This wasn't about training alone. It was about recognition. Rex's handler remained vigilant, keeping a firm grip on the leash, yet unable to hide the awe in his expression. He had worked with the German shepherd for years, watched him track missing children, sniff out danger, and alert officers to threats invisible to the human eye. But now, in a courtroom crowded with humans, the dog's instincts had become the center of attention, revealing a truth no one could argue against. The defendant shifted in his chair, sweat forming on his brow. His eyes darted between the girl and the dog, and he swallowed hard, each gulp audible in the still air. He adjusted his tie, tried to sit upright, and exhale, but every subtle movement betrayed him. The confidence he had carried into the courtroom that morning was gone, replaced with an unease that radiated outward, infecting even the defense attorney. The jurors were silent, captivated by the unusual interplay unfolding before them. They could see the child's unwavering focus, the dog's silent attention, and the defendant's trembling hesitation. It was clear to everyone that the courtroom drama was no longer about facts or testimony alone. It was about recognition, instinct, and truth itself. A few spectators whispered nervously, exchanging uneasy glances. "Do you see that?" One asked, voice low. "The dog. He's watching." "Him." The other nodded, almost afraid to speak. "And the child? It's like she knows something we don't." The defense attorney, sensing his control slipping, tried to regain the narrative. "Your Honor, I must insist that the court focus on evidence presented under the law, not distractions. This," he gestured vaguely toward the girl and the sea, "dog is irrelevant and prejudicial." But his words fell flat. Even the judge paused, glancing once more at the pair. He understood the principle of law, yet he could not dismiss the undeniable power of what was happening. The prosecutor's pen hovered over his notes, but he had little need to write. He leaned forward slightly, voice low, measured. "Your Honor, the presence of a canine trained to detect danger, paired with the reaction of a child, is far from irrelevant. These two witnesses, though unconventional, are highlighting behavior that points to a truth we have yet to fully comprehend." The judge exhaled slowly. "Very well," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Proceed, but maintain order. No distractions." The little girl, however, had other plans. She wasn't interested in court procedures. She stood up, tiny, feet moving unsteadily on the polished floor. Her guardian grasped her hand, whispering softly, "Honey, please. Stay seated. Don't make a scene." But the child didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, moving closer to Rex. The dog's ears flicked slightly, tail stiffening, and his eyes locked onto her. The silent bond intensified, palpable in the us. Room like a thread pulling the attention of every living person toward them. The defendant's hands trembled. He tried to maintain composure, his breath coming in shallow, rapid bursts. He realized he could not escape the scrutiny, not the child's, not Rex's, and certainly not the unspoken verdict echoing in the courtroom. "He knows," the child whispered again, louder this time, her words filled with clarity and unflinching certainty. The courtroom had become a theater of stillness. Every eye followed the scene as the girl extended her hand slightly, as if signaling to Rex. The German shepherd leaned slightly toward her, responding with subtle acknowledgement. A tilt of the head, a slow, deliberate exhale. He was alert, aware, and aligned with the girl's intent. The jurors felt it too. Even without testimony or evidence, the scene conveyed a truth that could not be denied. It was primal, instinctive, and undeniable. The defendant could feel it in his chest. He squirmed, realizing that the child and the dog were not merely observers. They were participants in a revelation that he could not manipulate. The defense attorney rose again, voice shaking. "Objection. This is ridiculous. The court cannot allow." He paused mid-sentence as Rex shifted slightly, muscles taut, eyes narrowing directly on the accused. It was a subtle motion, almost imperceptible, yet heavy with meaning. The judge stared, momentarily speechless. The court had rules, procedures, boundaries, but here, before his eyes, was an unspoken truth conveyed in the silent language of instinct and innocence. The prosecutor finally spoke, calmly, deliberately. "Your Honor, this is exactly why the courtroom has paused. What we are witnessing may not be evidence in the traditional sense, but it is an undeniable indicator of truth. The child has reacted to the presence of this canine, and the canine, in turn, is reacting to the defendant. This is beyond coincidence." The jurors nodded subtly, understanding the gravity of the situation. Every flick of Rex's ears, every subtle movement of his tail, Every moment of focused attention told a story. They couldn't put it into words, but they felt it. The little girl whispered once more, almost reverently, "He knows." Her guardian hugged her tighter, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, honey," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't expect this." Rex's handler gave a quiet, firm whisper. "Good boy." The dog's muscles relaxed slightly, but his eyes never left the defendant. The accused man's confidence had eroded completely. He tried to adjust his posture, to breathe, to regain composure, but it was useless. Every instinct in the courtroom told him he had been exposed. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle reaction from the child, and Rex confirmed it. The trial had changed irrevocably. No longer was it a matter of evidence alone. It had become a story of innocence, instinct, and the unshakable bond between a child and a dog that would forever alter the course of justice in that room. And in that moment, everyone understood. The truth was no longer hidden. It had arrived silently, steadily, and undeniably. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation. Every heartbeat, every whisper of movement seemed amplified, echoing off the polished walls. The trial had transformed from a legal proceeding into a spectacle of instinct and innocence. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, unable to look away. Spectators shuffled in their benches, eyes locked on the trio at the front, the little girl, her guardian, and the German shepherd whose presence now seemed almost human in its weight. The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly. Her small face was solemn, her wide eyes fixed unwaveringly on Rex. The dog remained alert, muscles coiled, ears pricked, his amber gaze scanning the defendant as if reading his very thoughts. The defendant, sitting stiffly in his chair, had begun to tremble. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, his hands fidgeted, and his jaw tightened with visible strain. Every time he tried to speak, his voice cracked, betraying the calm he had attempted to maintain. He could feel the invisible weight of judgment pressing down upon him, conveyed not through words or testimony, but through the silent, unshakable bond between a child and a dog. The defense attorney rose again, voice pitched high, with desperation. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The court cannot allow a child's words or a dog's behavior to influence legal proceedings." He waved his hands dramatically, but the jurors were no longer paying attention. Their eyes remained fixed on the small girl and the German shepherd, sensing something profound beyond explanation. The judge pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "Proceed cautiously," he warned, though his own tone betrayed the uncertainty creeping into his thoughts. Even the law had its limits, and this situation was testing them. The prosecutor, sensing the perfect moment, rose. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "While we must follow legal procedures, the canine's response and the child's observations are undeniable. Rex is trained to detect threats and recognize individuals who may be responsible for criminal actions. The child's reaction confirms what the dog is sensing. This is not theatrics, it is instinctive recognition of guilt." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the gallery leaned forward. The tension was tangible, almost electric. The little girl's whisper, barely audible, cut through the silence. "He knows." The words, repeated for what felt like the 100th time, seemed to hang in the air like a spell. They carried weight far beyond their simplicity, reverberating through the room and embedding themselves into the consciousness of everyone present. Rex's posture changed subtly. His tail stiffened further, his head lowered slightly, eyes narrowing, yet his gaze remained fixed on the defendant. It was a silent accusation, a truth unspoken but undeniable. The dog's instincts, honed over years of training, now aligned with the child's innate understanding. Together, They formed a force no argument could counter. The defendant's breathing grew shallow. He swallowed hard, shifting in his seat as though trying to escape an invisible weight. His hands fumbled in his lap, his knuckles white as he clenched them. Every subtle movement betrayed fear, panic, and the awareness that the courtroom now recognized a truth he could not conceal. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, voice trembling, "the jury is being unduly influenced. This is a child. This is a dog. Neither can provide admissible testimony. The proceedings are being compromised." The judge leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily. He understood the argument, yet the reality was impossible to ignore. The child's repeated words, the dog's unwavering gaze, and the defendant's visible panic conveyed a truth more compelling than any testimony. The room had become a stage where instincts and innocence revealed what evidence alone could not. The little girl stood suddenly, small feet moving unsteadily but confidently. Her guardian gasped, trying to catch her, but the child gently pushed. Free, moving closer to Rex. Her voice, small but commanding, whispered once more, "He knows." Rex reacted instantly, shifting slightly, muscles coiling, ears pricked forward, tail stiffened. The dog's presence became almost magnetic, the tension radiating outward. Spectators leaned in, jurors exchanged glances, and the defendant's composure shattered further. He couldn't move his eyes from the dog, nor could he deny the silent accusation being leveled at him with each subtle gesture. The prosecutor stood, voice steady, taking advantage of the moment. "Your Honor, the evidence we have presented may be circumstantial, but the behavior we are witnessing is far from that." The child recognizes the defendant's guilt instinctively, and Rex's reactions corroborate this recognition. The courtroom is witnessing the convergence of human innocence and animal instinct, pointing to the same truth. The defense attorney's hands shook as he tried to intervene. "Objection! This is beyond reason. It is inadmissible." The jury. His words faltered as Rex emitted a low, rumbling exhale, subtle but full of intent. The sound was enough to silence the courtroom. The K-9 had spoken in his own way, affirming the child's declaration. Every person present felt the weight of it, the defendant's face drained of color. He could feel every eye upon him, not in judgment of the law, but of the truth being revealed before them. Sweat trickled down his temple as he realized the courtroom's perception had shifted irreversibly. He was no longer just a man on trial. He was a target of instinct, innocence, and undeniable recognition. The child whispered again, her voice clear and resolute. "He knows." At that moment, the jurors sat upright, eyes wide, as if a veil had been lifted. The weight of the child's repeated words, coupled with the dog's unwavering focus, was undeniable. Each subtle gesture, each whispered repetition of the phrase, reinforced a truth that could not be argued away. The courtroom had become still, as if holding its collective breath. Every adult present recognized the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. The trial, meant to rely on facts and evidence, had been overtaken by innocence and instinct, and the balance of power had shifted entirely. The judge, finally, rapped his gavel, though his voice trembled. "Order in the court." The prosecutor nodded slightly, satisfied with the progress. The little girl, sensing the shift, relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained bright and focused on Rex. The dog, sensing her calm, adjusted his stance, but never broke eye contact with the defendant. The defendant's hands shook uncontrollably. Now, he swallowed hard, attempting to speak, but no words emerged. His defenses had crumbled under the weight of a child's recognition and a dog's instinctive certainty. Every gesture, every breath, every twitch betrayed the truth. The courtroom had reached a tipping point. The innocence of a 3-year-old and the trained instincts of a K-9 had combined to reveal a truth no human argument could suppress. Every observer knew it, even if none dared speak it aloud. And as the child whispered one final time, the courtroom collectively understood. He knows. It was simple, clear, irrefutable. The silent bond had spoken, and no one present could deny its message. The courtroom was hushed, every occupant aware that something extraordinary had taken place. The trial, once a predictable march of testimony, cross-examinations and procedural motions, had been overtaken by instinct and innocence. The 3-year-old girl, small and unassuming, and the German shepherd, trained yet intuitive, had become the unexpected bearers of truth. The defendant sat frozen, his usual composure shattered. Every movement he made betrayed anxiety. His hands fidgeted, tapping nervously against his knees. Sweat glistened along his temples, and his eyes darted constantly between the little girl and Rex. He was aware, intensely aware, that the courtroom, the jury, the spectators, and even the judge were perceiving what he could not deny. His guilt was transparent, recognized without words. The little girl, clutching her stuffed rabbit, stood quietly near Rex. Her eyes, wide and serious, never left the dog. The canine remained poised, muscular, his amber gaze locked on the defendant. The subtle tension radiating from him was palpable, his instincts aligned perfectly with the child's awareness. They were partners in revelation, a silent duo that communicated truth where human words had failed. The jurors shifted in their seats, exchanging glances, each face a mirror of realization. They had watched the child repeat her simple words, "He knows," over and over, and observed the dog's focused, unwavering reactions. The combination was undeniable. Facts and evidence alone could not explain it, yet instinct and innocence spoke with authority no human voice could match. The judge, aware of the extraordinary circumstances, cleared his throat. Order in the court. His voice, firm yet tinged with disbelief, tried to restore traditional control. But even he knew the tone of the courtroom had shifted irrevocably. The procedural rules he upheld suddenly felt insufficient to capture the weight of what had occurred. The defense attorney's face had turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, to object, to redirect attention back to documents, witness testimony, or procedural technicalities, but he found no words sufficient. How could he argue against the silent testimony of a child and a dog? How could he maintain confidence in the face of instinct and truth that even he could sense? The prosecutor stood, pen lowered, taking in the tableau. His voice, calm but purposeful, filled the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence presented today has been clear. Yet we have witnessed an extraordinary alignment of recognition. A trained canine Rex has responded with precision to the presence of the defendant, and a child has repeatedly confirmed her awareness of the truth. These reactions, while unconventional, corroborate what the facts have suggested. The defendant's actions are not hidden. The court has seen truth in motion. The little girl whispered again, barely audible, "He knows." Every person in the courtroom felt the words. The jurors sat upright, leaning forward as if to catch every syllable, every nuance. Spectators exchanged shocked and emotional glances. Even the judge, seasoned and skeptical, felt the gravity of the statement in a way no legal argument could convey. Rex let out a faint, low exhale, a subtle acknowledgement of the child's words. His body remained tense, yet controlled, a living embodiment of awareness. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood as an observer and participant in truth, his instincts amplifying the certainty of what the child had declared. The defendant's breath came rapidly, shallow, and uneven. His attempts to appear composed were futile. Every movement, every subtle twitch, betrayed the panic and recognition he could no longer conceal. The jurors, attuned now to human behavior, As much as instinct and innocence noted every detail. The balance of perception had shifted entirely. The courtroom remained silent. It was a silence full of anticipation, a silence in which judgment had already been passed through observation rather than words. The little girl clutched her rabbit tighter, her small frame trembling slightly. She did not move, yet her gaze held a quiet authority. Rex remained beside her, vigilant, calm yet commanding, his presence speaking volumes in the absence of testimony. The judge finally rapped his gavel, more to acknowledge the extraordinary scene than to restore order. "The court acknowledges the unique circumstances we have witnessed," he said, his voice measured but thoughtful. "While we must follow legal procedure, it is clear that recognition of truth has occurred in this courtroom in a way that transcends ordinary testimony. We will proceed with the consideration of all evidence, though none can deny the weight of what has just been observed." The jurors, though bound to deliberate based on admissible evidence, had witnessed something profound. The child's repeated declaration, "He knows," and the canine's unwavering focus had communicated truth in a form no words could capture. The defendant's guilt, while still subject to legal review, was evident in the instinctive reactions of those who could perceive it. The gallery held its collective breath. Spectators whispered softly, some covering their mouths in disbelief. News reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing the unprecedented courtroom drama. Cameras, if present, would have recorded the intersection of innocence, instinct, and human behavior in a manner rarely seen. The defendant's composure collapsed entirely. He attempted to rise, to protest, to argue, but the energy in the room was overwhelming. His eyes, darting nervously between the child and Rex, betrayed complete awareness that the truth had been observed and silently acknowledged. The little girl, sensing the shift, stepped closer to Rex. She whispered again, barely audible, "He knows." Rex's response was immediate. His head lowered slightly, ears pricked forward, tail stiffened. The motion was subtle, but it carried intent. It was confirmation, a nonverbal seal of recognition. The defendant, witnessing this silent verdict, felt his remaining defenses crumble. The jurors, witnesses, and courtroom spectators alike realized the climax had arrived. No procedural argument could undo the convergence of human innocence and animal instinct. They had watched truth unfold silently before them, with clarity no human testimony could replicate. The judge, acknowledging the extraordinary moment, adjusted his robe and addressed the courtroom. "We will recess briefly before deliberations. Let the record show that the courtroom has observed behaviors and statements that, while unconventional, convey a powerful affirmation of recognition. The jury is tasked with weighing whole evidence, but the extraordinary circumstances we have witnessed cannot be ignored." The child, satisfied, finally relaxed slightly. She hugged her rabbit, her wide eyes flicking to Rex, who lowered his stance in quiet acknowledgement. Their bond, unspoken and unbreakable, had become the silent arbiter of truth. The defendant slumped in his chair, pale and defeated. He no longer attempted to speak. His demeanor had been irrevocably altered. Every person in the courtroom, from jurors to spectators to legal professionals, could sense the depth of his exposure. As the trial resumed, the jurors deliberated with the weight of evidence and instinct upon them. The extraordinary events, child's repeated words, and the canine's reactions had shifted perception. It was not simply a case of law and procedure anymore. It was a testament to human innocence, the acuity of animal instinct, and the ways in which truth manifests itself beyond words and documentation. Hours later, the courtroom reconvened for the verdict. The jurors filed in, solemn and deliberate. The defendant rose, pale and trembling. The judge called the court to order. Every eye was fixed on the jury box. One by one, the jurors declared the verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The words echoed through the room. The child clutched her rabbit tightly, her eyes wide as realization. Dawned. She had said nothing more than he knows. Yet the courtroom, adults and all, had understood. Rex remained at her side, silent, yet proud. The defendant's shoulders slumped. The weight of recognition, the convergence of innocence and instinct, had rendered all denials meaningless. The judge rapped the gavel, finality in every strike. Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, some in tears. The child hugged her guardian tightly, while Rex sat obediently by, a silent hero of the day. In the end, truth had spoken in whispers and glances, in instinct and innocence. And for everyone who had witnessed it, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, the most profound revelations come not from arguments, but from the pure, unfiltered understanding of a child and a loyal companion. The trial would be remembered for years. To come not for testimony or exhibits, but for a small girl, a police canine, and two simple words that left an entire courtroom in shock. He knows.